Okay, so first up, thanks for everybody for having me along. So I'm here to talk about innovating in the context of uncertainty, or about how the hell do we work out what we need to do when nobody knows what we should be working on. So the first thing we're going to do is actually deconstruct these terms a little bit, and we'll look at what innovating means. And the interesting thing about innovating is it's a word that we're sort of overused. The way I like to think about it is basically doing better. Now, the interesting thing about using it as doing better means that what's innovative depends on what we're currently doing. So it's doing better in the context of uncertainty. And the way I like to think about uncertainty isn't this weird abstract concept. It's just that nobody knows exactly what we should be doing. And there'll be people around that tell you that they know exactly what they'll be doing, but they're either lying to you or lying to themselves. So what we've got is that we're doing better in the context of when nobody knows, right? And that's what I'm really talking about today. And let's just rewrite out that whole nobody knows thing, because that's a bit of a weird one to hear, right? So now there's two types of people that hear this concept that nobody knows. There's the people that go, hang on, Peter, wait, what? Someone's supposed to know. And in fact, I'm generally here listening to you because apparently you know. Right? So if you're one of those people, I'm just going to ask you to just pause that for a second and come with me down the run of the other side, which is the people in the audience that also went, cool. I knew that nobody else knew. I totally get that. And now watch how fast I can outperform everybody else, because if nobody else knows, then I'm good. Now, just quickly on that whole nobody knows thing, it's really important that it's got nothing to do with our capability or the person's capability about them not knowing what we need to do. It's mainly because it's unknowable. And the best example of that, that's a horrible way of writing that, but anyway, the best example of that is 5 years ago, if I showed myself my current mobile phone, I'd accuse me of being a witch, right? And a lot of the social media stuff and a lot of everything that's out there, that has changed the game. So even if you had the perfect plan, if its origin is based in 5 years ago or 20 years ago, whoever you're talking to's experiment, it's probably not right. Now, it definitely rhymes, but it's probably not right. And the easy way to think about that is that everything moves, right? It's constant flux, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second as well. So the next thing that I want to talk about is that it's a little bit interesting as well if we start to think about the context. Now, the context of new ventures, and you could say startups there, or you could say businesses there, or you could say corporate accelerators, or whatever it is, new ventures, new things that we're doing, is that we're actually under this problem that we've got, which is that we're under resource constraints. And that's a main feature that's different than a lot of other businesses when we're talking about startups. Okay, now the resource constraints that we're working under are generally, what can we do? And I'll just jump in now and assert that that's not actually as much of a problem that used to be. It used to be a real constraint about there's only a certain number of things that we can do. But now, with all the technology coming through, it moves from being this physics into being science, into being engineering, into being artisan, into being art. So a lot of the stuff we're doing, we can actually achieve. But we still have constraints. We normally have a constraint here, which is around time. So time is of the essence in what we're doing. And we also have another constraint here, which is around money. And a lot of the things that are different around new ventures or around we don't know what to do is really around helping us manage these two constraints. Okay. Now, just zooming out a little bit on the can thing, right? The big risk that we've got now that we can build anything isn't whether we can build it, it's whether we build the wrong thing. So we're doing a little bit of work there to make sure we're building the right thing and we're trying to be efficient with time and with money, okay? Now, next little bit of context is it gets a little bit harder than that as well. So normally when we're talking about startups, we're looking for three things. And the majority of the work that I do in programs, for a long time, we spoke about two things and not the third one. So the first one that we generally talked about is working out what was desirable. So desirable. You can think of that as what should we build? And that's where we're doing all the MVPs and customer interviews and those sorts of things. Now, the next part that we're looking for is we're looking for the intersection of that and what we can build. And the way we talk about that is what is feasible. And you could argue that the thing that we're looking for in the middle here is product market fit. Now, we could probably spend 20 minutes talking about whether that's exactly product market fit, but it's in that sort of area. And we spend a lot of time about doing customer discovery, and we're trying to find that thing there, but that's not enough. What we actually need is a third thing to come in here. And we don't talk about this one that often. Well, I talk about it all the time now, is a third circle down here. We're talking about what's viable. Okay. And you can think of that as what will people actually pay for? Now, there's a distinction between what people will actually pay for and what they actually want to buy. And the best way to illustrate that is actually with a really simple, trivial example of, let's say that you can build a rocket ship. So rocket ship, absolutely, it's over here and feasible. And you know what? If you're selling it to me, I definitely want a rocket ship. So now we're in this section here, absolutely. And we can talk about all the different features and what color it needs to be and propulsion and all that sort of stuff and the leather seats and all that sort of thing. And that's really good. And we can find this beautiful product that I absolutely desire. The problem is the next question you're going to ask me is, hey, Peter, it's time to pay for it. And I say, absolutely, very happy to pay for it. It's exactly what I want. And they say it's $50 million. And then we all pause and there's this uncomfortable silence because I can't possibly pay $50 million. Now, the first reaction from people is to add extra features. Hey, Peter, what if we put the plush leather seats in rather than just the normal ones? Or what if we made it so it was gold plated or something like that? And that's great, but it doesn't actually make it any easier for me to pay. And in fact, normally when we try and adjust that to what people are actually after, to move it down into here, I'm just going to use white there, to move it down into there, actually move it over into here, which is something that I can pay for and you can build, but I really don't want it anymore, okay? So what I normally talk about in this model is we've got a third or a second option here. What we can do is we can take that line and move it. And in this analogy, that's about changing the business model. So it's, hey, Peter, how about you rent it instead of buying the rocket ship? I say, well, I'm interested in that. And let's do that. How much? And you say $50,000. I say, we're still in trouble, but we're a lot closer than we were before. Okay. So in that, we've changed the business model, but it's very important to note that the product hasn't changed at all. All we've done is change the business model. Okay. So what we're actually doing when we're running through this, when we're doing businesses and startups and new ventures and all those things, is we're desperately trying to find that part as opposed to just this part. We're trying to find the intersection of all three. And that sounds easy, Peter. We can still work that way. What we could do is get desirable first, and then we'll work out what we can build and then viable. And that's true, except for the fact that these circles move, okay? So desirability moves around all the time because it depends heavily on what other people are offering, okay? Because it's not about an absolute product value. It's about what I can get elsewhere. And the same thing happens down here on what's viable. If someone else is giving it away for free, then that circle moves away from where we are. And the last one that we'll talk about here, which is the last one that's left, right, is that the feasible one tends to get bigger and bigger. And you can think of that as it's getting easier and easier to actually build the products that we're talking about because we tend to share technology, but we tend to compete over desirability and viability, right? Now, I just want to add an extra thing on top of this and categorize how these things change. So over here on the left, what's feasible is complicated. A lot of moving parts. We spent a whole bunch of time describing it and everything, but one of the aspects of it is that it's repeatable. It doesn't matter whether we're doing it here or on the moon, in San Francisco, in China, or anywhere, it works the same way, okay? But these two over here, both the product and the business model, are complex in that they depend on what other people do. And that's still hard, and I'd actually say it's harder, but it's harder for a different reason. It's not because of the moving parts, it's because it doesn't matter how well we perform, we have to depend on what other people are doing to check what our value is, okay? Now, just as a really quick aside here, the reason I've drawn this in a weird way, just to tie it into some other stuff that you've probably seen, this is how a business model canvas is laid out. We have what's desirable, we have what's feasible, and then we have what's viable down here. And that is something that we can talk about. Sorry, I just got pinged that I've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm halfway through. So again, that's the feasible, oops, let's do it properly, right? Desirable, feasible, and viable. And that's how a business model canvas is laid out, which is why I drew it in that way, drew it in that way. Now, if we come back to here to these two complex things, we're going to assume that we can kind of get around this complicated stuff. And we're going to look at what the hell do we do about solving this complex problem of both what people want and that they'll pay for. And like we said before, they are distinct. Now, a lot of the trends that you'll hear people talk about at the moment, they'll say, yeah, Peter, it's really interesting, easy as well. We can totally do this. We speak to customers. And that's a super, really interesting plan. There's one problem to it. It's that customers lie. Well, they don't so much lie as they just don't know. They're definitely a source of information, but there's a problem with this source. The first problem is they don't know what they want. And the next problem is that in addition to that, they don't know what they need. And then on top of that, they also don't know what you can do. Oops, with a T. And it's unfair to expect them to understand your capability in being able to answer their questions. And the last thing, and this is the absolute kicker, the last thing is they don't have the vocab to be able to express it, even if they did know those three things, right? So now I'm feeling like I'm giving everybody a bit of a downer, but don't worry. What we actually do is we use this thing that you've all heard way too often that's going to help us work this stuff out. We use this thing called an MVP, a minimal viable product. But the point of it isn't to incrementally deliver. It's to give the business the ability, or the customers that we're talking to, an ability to understand those things. Most importantly, give us the vocab. Okay. Now, the way that we actually make use of this MVP is that we go out and we try and build something that's going to give us that information. So if you frame it as buying information from your customer, you can feel a lot happy about it. Now, remember, we are operating under time and money constraints. So we have to be efficient with that, right? And one of the nice things about startups is I don't need to teach them that because they've got no other options. Corporates, on the other hand, have a lot of both, and that causes them problems because they don't invest properly. So you're here, you've got this vision that you'd like to build, right? And that's your thesis that you're trying to do. And you'd love to snap your fingers and build that and drop it in front of them to work it out. But remember, we're time and money constrained. So what we need to be doing is building the smallest possible thing we can to work out whether we should build that properly. We are not trying to incrementally deliver this. We're trying to work out what the smallest possible thing is. And that's the way that I define what a minimal viable product is, or an MVP. Now, this is sort of familiar to some people. And the way that what we're actually using here is this thing that we all learned a long time ago in school, which is science. And I also can't help myself. I've got to draw the mean. So what we're doing is we're buying information from our customers and giving them the vocab around whether we should buy that properly at all. Now, there's three outcomes from this. The first outcome is that it's, yes, Peter, build that thing, right? So we show them this. They say, yeah, if you can build that, I'm in. And that's a happy outcome, right? The next outcome that can happen is we build this and we show it to them and they say, oh, God's no, Peter, don't build that. Now, interestingly, that's a happy outcome as well. Now, just to explain that a bit, it's because we've actually just saved all that time and money by finding it out back here, okay? Now, the last part of it is the third outcome from this is if we build this thing and we still don't know, right? That is the only way we can fail in executing in this manner. Right? So we actually use that, and the reason we use it is because of our time and money constraints. not because it's a cool way to work or not that because that's the way adults work. Okay, so now we're into how the hell do we operationalize that from if we're talking about new ventures, because we need some sort of governance model around what we're doing with this. We can't just spend money and do whatever we want. And part of the reason that this doesn't work that well is because technologists agree or tend to interpret this as we can do whatever we want. But this is actually a super high discipline process, even though we can explain it really well. So we're here. We've got this vision for the future with the land of rainbows and unicorns and cats and dogs living together, the land of milk and honey. And if we could snap our fingers, we get there. But what we do is we build the smallest possible thing we can to work out whether we should build that properly. And we validate that. We actually take it out and give it to someone and ask them to use it. And they go, no, Peter, that's not what we need. And I suck it up and I build this thing down here and I go that way. And that's our next MVP. And we build that and we validate it again. We give it to people to use, not whether they think they'll buy it. No, you'll use the thing. And they say, oh, God, no, Peter, don't do that. But if you can do that sort of magic, then build this thing up here. And I suck it up again because look at what I've saved. I'm kind of happy in both of these cases, right? But now I suck it up again and build in that direction, okay? And then I validate again. I'm a little bit nervous about it this time, but they say, yeah, absolutely, keep going, Peter. So I build the next one and I validate it again and they say, oh, we love it, but Google just released that there. And I suck it up again and I say, well, let's beat Google later, but let's run away from them now a bit. We build that one. And then we build the next version and we catch up. Now, we may think we're close to finishing here, but we're not because the product's never done. We need to go this way if we ask for the next one. So we're tracking really well. Now, there's a few interesting things in this diagram. The first one is if we collapse these down, call our shot, execute, call our shot, execute, call our shot, execute in these manners, what it looks like is we're here, we call our shot, we execute, we deliver, we come back, go again, come back, go again. So that looks super familiar, especially if I put a retro on it. So what we've actually arrived at here is in a tight time constraint and money constraint, the business case for Agile. And it's because the biggest risk we've got is that we will build the wrong thing, even if we efficiently do it. So we need to manage that risk. The next interesting thing out of this diagram is that you need to talk about that vision for the future, but it doesn't need to be perfectly defined, right? Because it needs to be a good vision, because normally there's a mountain in the way and nobody wants to climb that unless there's something cool on the other side. But note that it doesn't need to be perfectly defined because the first step is pretty much the same back here. And note also that it doesn't really matter where you are when you start because you're going to be following your market in. You're going to end up in the same spot or somewhere equally as cool. And a big part of the context is we don't know whether we're going to end up there or there, so we have to manage it, okay? So what we do next is we look at this and think, well, even if we choose to build the wrong thing, that skill set is perfectly transferable to the next thing that we're going to do. But now instead of it being ready, aim, fire, what it is ready, fire, aim. And of course, someone's phoning me, right? Ready, fire, aim. And the problem is, though that's really good, we're very sensitive to how well we aim. And the problem is that the way that we aim is with these MVPs. And the problem there is that as a species across the board, we suck at MVPs. So what we need to be doing is actually incrementally deliver. I'm just going to come back there. I'm not going to write it out. We have to incrementally deliver. Instead of incrementally deliver what we're doing, which is where everybody thinks we're doing, we're going to build the perfect bridge. What we need to be doing is buying information, because our biggest risk is that we really don't know if that vision that we've got is the right thing. And in my opinion, given that these things are moving around, that we're trying to find the middle of, and that's hard to find, it's the only way that we can actually deal with the fact that nobody knows what we should be building. So that's a really quick run through on what I need to do. And hopefully that's my stop sound, right, that I need to get rid of. So thank you very much for having me along. I'm just going to zoom back up to the top. We've been through a lot of stuff. That's why your head's spinning a bit. So that was me up here. Please reach out. I'm happy to have a chat. Thank you very much for having me along.